The ABC show this week had a pretty good conversation about money in politics. That's fairly surprising for the mainstream media. In fact, Michael Smirkanish, who's usually incredibly boring, Keith Ellison, the representative, and even Laura Ingraham agreed and came out on the right side of the issue of money in politics. But listen closely here. You're going to hear a little bit from each of them. But then when they get to Newt Gingrich, listen closely to what he says, because this is very telling.
I am not in favor of anything that makes it easier for the incumbency in Washington, D.C. And this Cromnibus bill makes it easier for the incumbents and the establishment in both parties to run amok. Most of these people didn't read this bill, and most of these people don't know what's in this bill. How this is good for the people? Ask me.
On the subject of campaign finance, it's a win for the parties. Their function has been usurped in recent years by independent actors. It's a loss, I think, for the country. Post Citizens United, the best that we can hope for at this stage, I think, is transparency. What I'm most offended by, Martha, is the idea that in the waning days of the midterm, tens of millions of dollars were spent. People went and cast ballots not knowing who had just influenced their vote. We've got to have real-time disclosure and names associated with the contributions.
One of the things in looking at this, could it actually add more accountability because the donations have to be disclosed?
You know, I don't really think so. I think that's what the people who want this are going to say. But at the end of the day, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. And if you can pay the piper more than anybody else, you're going to call more tunes. And so I think this was a real loss.
But I want to go back to this funding thing. Once you've had the Citizens United decision, the best election law you could have would allow anyone to give to candidates any amount as long as it's reported every night on the internet, because you're much safer to have it there. But I just have to say this. To have Barbara Walters suggest that David Koch has a lot of influence. I'd like to know the value of Barbara Walters' opinion over her career on television, unpaid for. I mean, this whole thing the elite media has of, oh, look at these rich guys who are about to tell you something.
I'm supposed to jump in here, right?
No, I'm just saying, think about it. I'm just saying, this is actually something Gene McCarthy said to Walter Cronkite in 1968. You talk about politics and money. How about the power you guys have? Because what Koch represents is an effort by conservatives to offset the elite media.
Did you catch it at the end? He says what the Koch guys are doing, that's an effort to beat back the influence of the elite media. First of all, it's ridiculous to say, as Newt Gingrich does on a regular basis, oh, goddamn liberal media, they're so liberal, they're so liberal. Well, what are liberal priorities? Medicare for all? Do we have that, and do they push for that? No. Getting out of Afghanistan? Getting out of Iraq? Getting out of Syria? Are we doing that at all? Are they talking about that at all? Not at all. Raising the minimum wage. Maybe they talk about that a little bit more than they talk about the other things, but they don't do it on a daily basis, and they certainly don't lobby for it. Okay? The idea that the media is liberal is ridiculous. We've gone over it before. They have a sensationalism bias, by and large, and a false neutrality bias, by and large, where they listen to both sides endlessly. But the point that Gingrich was making is he's basically admitting, look, conservatives can't win unless we flood in money and prop up these candidates and try to get our ideas with our wallets. That's what he's saying. He's saying the only reason the Kochs are doing it is they're trying to offset the elite media and the liberals, and they think the only way for them to get the policy they want is to buy it. Well, that's exactly right, Newt. That's exactly right, and that's the problem. That's the problem. That's not how a democracy is supposed to function. If we're not dealing with a constitutional issue, which by definition is off the table because they're rights, outside of that, we're supposed to have a representative democracy where the will of the majority is put into law as long as it doesn't conflict with the Constitution. And what do we have? We don't have that at all. We're nowhere near that. In fact, just to disprove Gingrich's point about how the liberals have so much power and the elite media pushes a liberal agenda, really? Then why is it that there was recently a political science study, I think it came out of Princeton, and I think it may have been Columbia, one professor from each, where they looked into the effect of money on politics and how much of the majority opinion throughout all of the U.S. affects policy and law. You know what they found? The majority opinion has no effect. No effect. But you know where there was a perfect correlation? Between what's called the donor class and the policies and the laws that they get. So all of their priorities, they get into law. I mean, another example that is deficit reduction. They all love deficit reduction. They scream about it nonstop. Well, what's the government been doing under the Obama administration for the past 8 years? Nothing but deficit reduction. They've done it. Now the deficit is $483 billion when Obama inherited $1.4 trillion deficit. So another example is the TPP. The American people are solidly opposed to it. But what's the government doing? Democrats and Republicans are pushing for the TPP because they're not listening to you and me. They're listening to the people who gave them the money, the donor class. And we can see how our opinions have no effect on the law. 90% of the American people wanted a universal background check for gun purchases. We couldn't get that. 90% we couldn't get it. Never mind 80%, which is what the minimum wage percentage is. We couldn't get the minimum wage raised, even though we all want that, even a majority of Republicans. And the list goes on and on. 59% want gay marriage. We still don't have that at a federal level. 59% want to legalize marijuana. We still don't have that at a federal level. It all goes by what the rich want. And Newt Gingrich is admitting there, yes, the only way that us so-called conservatives can get what we want is to fucking pay politicians. Because that's the only way that we can be heard, because our ideas are genuinely unpopular and we can't convince the population to get behind them because they're not good ideas. They're only ideas that further our power and make us more rich.